The Catherian homeworld burned like a dying ember against the black canvas of space. Captain Jake Morrison could taste the bile rising in his throat as he watched an entire civilization being systematically erased. The command deck of the U.S. Thunderstrike hummed with tense energy, every screen painting the same horrific picture in stark, unforgiving detail. You know that feeling when you witness something so wrong, so fundamentally evil, that your entire body rejects what your eyes are showing you? That's exactly what hit Jake like a sledgehammer to the chest, as the distress signal continued its desperate broadcast across 17 different galactic languages. Each translation carried the same bone-chilling message. Help us, or they're killing. Everyone, please, someone help us. The signal had pierced through space during what should have been the most boring part of their patrol route. Jake's small fleet of 6 human vessels had been conducting routine sweeps near the Outer Rim territories. The kind of mind-numbing duty that made seasoned officers question their career choices. Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez had been complaining about the terrible coffee in the mess hall just moments before her tactical console erupted in urgent red warnings. Captain Rodriguez called out, her voice tight with the kind of urgency that makes your blood run cold, reading massive energy signatures bearing 27 Mark IV. Looks like Reaper-class destroyers conducting orbital bombardment. Jesus Christ, sir. They're glassing the entire northern continent. Jake's weathered hands gripped the command rail until his knuckles turned white. The tactical display showed a scene straight out of humanity's worst nightmares. 12 massive alien warships, each one the size of a small city, methodically reducing. Crystal spires and gleaming metropolises to molten slag. The energy readings were off the charts. The kind of firepower that could crack a planet's crust if sustained long enough. But here's what really twisted the knife in Jake's gut. The life sign readings. Millions of them, clustered in underground. Shelters and emergency bunkers, pulsing like terrified heartbeats on his sensors. These weren't military installations being destroyed. These weren't weapon factories or strategic targets. The Reapers were systematically hunting down civilian population centers, turning families into vapor with the casual efficiency of an exterminator. Sweet Mother of God, whispered Ensign Bobby Chen from the communications station, his young face pale as moonlight. Captain, I'm picking up individual transmissions now. They're saying goodbye to each other, sir. Parents telling their children they love them. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady beep of incoming data streams. Jake Morrison had seen combat before the Proxima Rebellion, the Titan mining. Wars. Even that nasty business with the rogue AI collective near Vega Prime. But this was different. This was the systematic extermination of an entire species that had apparently done nothing. Worse than exist in the wrong place at the wrong time, Commander Ryan Walsh. Jake's second in command, and the closest thing he had to a best friend, cleared his throat nervously. Walsh was the kind of Bythe book officer who alphabetized his regulation manuals and could quote fleet protocol in his sleep. Sir, the signal wasn't meant for us, he said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of military discipline. Long-range analysis shows it was broadcast specifically to the Galaxy Defense Coalition's emergency response frequencies. We're not authorized to engage in first contact scenarios without direct orders from Fleet Command. Now here's where things get interesting. Jake Morrison wasn't your typical fleet captain. Sure, he looked the part with his graying temples and regulation uniform pressed to military perfection, but beneath that professional exterior burned something much more dangerous, an absolute, unwavering belief that some things were more important than following orders. I don't give a damn about authorization, Jake snarled, his blue eyes blazing with the kind of fury that made hardened Marines take a step back. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees as every officer present felt the shift. In their captain's demeanor, those are living beings down there being slaughtered like animals. Men, women, children, innocent people who never hurt anyone, never threatened anyone, and sure as hell never deserved this. The tactical display updated again, showing 3 more Reaper destroyers dropping out of hyperspace to join the massacre. I think the math was becoming impossibly grim. Jake's small patrol fleet consisted of 6 vessels, 1 heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers. And to support frigates, standard Earth technology, reliable but nowhere near cutting edge. The Reaper fleet now numbered 15 ships, each one equipped with weapon systems that made human military hardware look like stone knives and bearskins. But you know what? Sometimes math doesn't matter. Sometimes the numbers on a screen can't calculate the weight of human conscience or measure the strength of righteous anger. All ships. This is Thunderstrike, Jake announced over the fleet communications channel, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had been forged in the fires of a dozen battles. Form up in attack formation Delta 7. We're going in. Response was immediate and electric. Despite the impossible odds, despite facing technology that could vaporize them without breaking a sweat, not a single human vessel hesitated. The valiant, defiant, liberty, courage, and resolve moved into position like wolves, preparing to defend their pack. Their crews knowing full well they were probably flying toward their deaths. Lieutenant Rodriguez's hands flew across. Her console, weapon systems coming online with deadly efficiency. Captain, enemy vessels are changing course. Looks like we got their attention. Commander Walsh stepped closer to Jake's command position, his voice dropping to a worried whisper. Sir, with all due respect, this is suicide. We're outnumbered. 3-1, outgunned by factors we can't even calculate. These aren't pirates or raiders. These are reapers. They've been systematically conquering star systems for over 2 centuries. Jake turned to face his old friend, and for a moment the mask of command slipped away, revealing something raw and human underneath. Ryan, I've got a daughter back on Earth. She's 7 years old, loves puppies and strawberry ice cream, and still believes the universe is fundamentally good. How do I go home and look her in the eye, knowing I had the chance to save millions of children just like her, and chose to follow regulations instead? The bridge crew exchanged glances filled with fear, determination, and something else. Pride. They were serving under a captain who would rather die fighting for strangers than live with the shame of walking away from genocide. The first Reaper destroyer noticed their approach and swung its massive bulk toward the human fleet like a predator scenting fresh prey. Energy readings spiked as alien weapon systems powered up, preparing to swat these insignificant insects from the void. But Jake Morrison felt only one emotion burning in his chest as he watched certain death approach at light speed. Protective rage. So pure and focused it could have powered a star. Today we show these bastards what happens when you mess with the innocent, he declared, his voice carrying across every human ship in the fleet. Today we remind the galaxy that some things are worth dying for. The first plasma salvo from the Reaper destroyer lit up space like an angry god's lightning bolt, and the real fight began. The human fleet dove into the inferno like missiles, seeking justice. And Captain Jake Morrison felt his soul catch fire as plasma death streaked past his command deck windows. You ever watch a nature documentary where a pack of wolves attacks a grizzly bear to protect their cubs? That's exactly what 6 human warships looked like as they charged headfirst into 15 Reaper destroyers completely outmatched. Absolutely suicidal, and utterly magnificent in their desperate fury. The Thunderstrike shuddered like a wounded animal as the first wave of alien plasma cannons found their mark. Energy bolts the size of city buses slammed into her reinforced hull, turning 30 tons of military-grade steel into glowing slag in the blink of an eye. But Jake pressed forward through the wall of enemy fire, his weathered hands dancing across the navigation controls with the kind of reckless precision that separates heroes from corpses. Evasive maneuvers, pattern gamma, barked throwing his ship into a spiraling dive between 2 massive Reaper dreadnoughts. The alien vessels were each over 2 miles long, bristling with enough firepower to level entire continents. But they moved like lumbering giants compared to the nimble human, ships darting between their legs like angry hornets. The bridge exploded in a symphony of chaos and determination. Warning klaxons screamed their mechanical panic while damage reports poured in from every section of the ship. Sparks cascaded from overloaded consoles, filling the air with the sharp smell of burning electronics and the metallic taste of fear. Hull. Breach on Deck 7. Chief Engineer Tommy Brooks shouted over the cacophony, his Brooklyn accent thick with adrenaline and barely controlled terror. We're venting atmosphere like a punctured balloon. Sealing emergency bulkheads now, but Captain, we can't take many more hits like that. But here's the thing about desperate situations. Sometimes they reveal the very best in people, Lieutenant. Emma Rodriguez, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead where a console had exploded, never missed a beat as she coordinated the fleet's attack patterns. Captain the Valiant is making her attack run on the enemy flagship. Commander Peterson is requesting cover fire. Jake's tactical display lit up like a deadly Christmas tree as he watched Commander Sarah. Peterson's destroyer dived straight down the throat of the largest Reaper vessel, her ship's hull already glowing cherry red from plasma impacts. The woman had balls of steel, that was for certain. All ships concentrate fire on that dreadnought's shield generators. Give Peterson the opening she needs. Meanwhile, 300 miles below the space battle, something extraordinary was happening on the dying world of Cathera Prime, the crystalline. Beings huddled in their underground shelters had never experienced anything like warfare before. Their entire civilization was built on harmony, mathematical precision, and the kind of peaceful coexistence that most species could only dream about. They were poets and philosophers, artists and scientists, but they had never learned the brutal art of violence through their telepathic network. Every Catherian felt each other's terror as a shared nightmare that threatened to shatter their collective consciousness. Elder Vexti, her translucent form pulsing with anxiety patterns that looked like fractured lightning, tried to maintain some semblance of calm among the refugees packed into Shelter Complex Alpha 7. The burning continues, whispered Young. Nixata, her crystalline body flickering between pale blue and deep purple colors that meant fear and despair in the Catherian emotional spectrum. I can feel our brothers and sisters in the northern colonies. They're going silent, one by one. But then something impossible happened. The rain of death from above suddenly stopped. You know that moment in a thunderstorm when the lightning and thunder just cut off, leaving behind an eerie silence that makes your ears ring? That's exactly what the Catherians experienced as the orbital bombardment ceased for the first time in 6 horrifying hours. Elder, fixed thigh, pressed her translucent face against the observation crystal that gave them a view of the surface, and what she saw made her ancient heart skip a beat. Strange ships, screwed and angular compared to the flowing curves of Reaper technology, were engaging the destroyers in brutal close combat. These newcomers fought with a savagery that defied all logic, diving into crossfires that should have vaporized them instantly. Who are they? Nixara whispered, her light form shifting to confused orange as hope began to battle with despair in her emotional matrix. What kind of beings would throw themselves into certain death for strangers? Vexia had no answer, but she watched. In stunned amazement as one of the alien vessel's engines, failing and hull cracked, open like a broken egg, deliberately rammed into a Reaper cruiser rather than retreat. The explosion lit up half the planet's night side, and when the glare faded, both ships were gone. By the crystal harmony, she breathed, using the most sacred oath in Catherian culture. They're sacrificing themselves, complete strangers, and they're dying for us. The space battle above raged with the fury of gods at war. The human destroyer Liberty screamed past a Reaper battleship, her captain a grizzled veteran named Marcus Stone pushing. His engines passed the red line as plasma bolts chased his ship like angry meteors. Stone had 3 kids back on Earth, and a wife who made the best apple pie in the solar system. But right now, all he could think about were the innocent civilians trapped below. This is Liberty. Stone's voice crackled over the communications channel, static-filled but unbroken. I'm making a torpedo run on their command ship. If I don't make it back, tell my wife I love her. The Liberty dove straight into the heart of the enemy formation, her torpedo tubes firing everything she had. The Reaper command vessel's shields flared like a small sun, as human. Weapons primitive by alien standards, but backed by desperate courage, found their mark. Captain Jake Morrison watched his friend's ship disappear in a ball of plasma fire and felt something inside his chest crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. All remaining ships, this is Thunderstrike. Form up for attack pattern Omega. We're going to punch a hole through their line so the evacuation can begin. But wait, evacuation. How could they possibly evacuate an entire planet's worth of refugees? With 6 ships, half of which were already damaged or destroyed? The answer came in the form of the most beautiful sound Jake Morrison had ever heard, the voice of every human transport and cargo vessel within 100 light-years. Responding to the emergency broadcast, his communications officer had sent out 20 minutes earlier. Captain Morrison, this is the merchant vessel Prairie Wind. We're not warships, but we've got cargo holds that can carry 10,000 refugees each. Where do you need us? Thunderstrike. This is Captain Maria Santos aboard the freighter New Horizon. My crew's volunteering for the evacuation run. We're coming in hot, so clear us a path. One by one, civilian vessels began dropping out of hyperspace cargo haulers. Passenger liners, mining ships, even a few tourist cruisers. They had no weapons, no armor, no military training whatsoever. They were just ordinary people with ordinary ships who had heard that somewhere in the darkness. Children were dying, and that was enough. Down in the shelters, the Catharians felt the shift in the battle's momentum through their psychic connection. Elder Vexti watched in wonder as the primitive alien ships began forming protective screens around what could only be rescue vessels. They're not just fighting for us, she realized, her voice filled with awe. They're organizing a complete evacuation. But why? What possible benefit could they gain from saving our people? Young Nixara, her crystalline form now blazing with hope's bright silver light, had the answer that would change both species forever. Maybe they don't need a reason. Maybe that's just who they are. The human battle cry echoed through space, as Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chaos like a sword of pure determination. This is the human fleet. We're coming down to get you. Hold the line. But as more Reaper reinforcements began dropping out of hyperspace, Jake Morrison realized they were about to face the ultimate test good courage and sacrifice. Triumph over overwhelming technological superiority, or were they all about to become martyrs in the cold vacuum of space? The next few minutes would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. Marine Sergeant Danny Cooper kicked through the shelter's entrance like the angel of death himself. His combat armor scorched black from the hellish drop through enemy fire that should have killed him 6 different ways. The drop pod's impact had left a crater the size of a swimming pool in the crystalline plaza above, and Danny's ears were still ringing from the plasma bolts that turned his squad's transport into a flying coffin. But here's the thing about Marines, they don't stay dead easy inside the underground shelter. Danny found himself face to face with something that made his battle-hardened mind struggle to process what he was seeing. Beings of pure living crystal stared back at him with eyes that weren't quite eyes, their translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that somehow conveyed more raw emotion than any human expression ever could. Terror and desperate. Hope radiated from them in waves so intense he could practically taste it in the recycled air of his helmet. God, Jesus Christ, Danny muttered, his rifle automatically scanning for threats while his brain tried to catch up with reality. These weren't the savage aliens or military targets he'd been trained to expect. These were families, mothers clutching children, elderly beings helping the wounded, teenagers trying to be brave while their inner light flickered with barely controlled panic. You know that moment when you walk into a room and instantly realize everything you thought you knew was completely wrong? That's exactly what hit Danny. Cooper like a sledgehammer to the soul as he took in the scene before him, a small Catharian child, no bigger than his own daughter. Emma back on Earth separated itself from the huddled group and approached him with the kind of cautious curiosity that only kids possess. The little being's crystalline form shifted from deep blue fear patterns to tentative yellow hope as it reached out one tiny, translucent hand toward his armored gauntlet. The moment their skin made contact, Danny felt something that nearly brought him to his knees. A wave of pure, unfiltered gratitude washed over his mind like warm sunlight, carrying with it emotions so intense and alien that his human brain could barely contain them. Love, fear, hope, and desperate thankfulness flooded through his consciousness in a telepathic tsunami that left him gasping inside his helmet. "Holy hell," he whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's as 20 years of military composure shattered against the innocence of that simple touch. "You're just babies. You're all just babies. The evacuation began under a storm of enemy fire that turned the sky above into a light show of death and destruction. Reaper ground forces had finally responded to the human intervention, sending wave after wave of their mechanical death dealers into the city. The spider-like war machines moved with predatory efficiency, their plasma cannons turning ancient crystal spires into molten slag while they hunted for any survivors who might have escaped their orbital bombardment. But if the Reapers thought a few ground troops would scare off the humans, they were about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a species that had crawled out of a gravity. While by sheer bloody-minded stubbornness, Danny's Marines spread out through the shelter. Complex like avenging angels, many of them wounded and bleeding from the hellish drop through enemy air defenses. Corporal Janet Martinez had taken shrapnel in her left shoulder, but still managed to carry 3 Catherian children to the evacuation shuttles. Private First Class Tom Wilson was missing half his face from a plasma burn, yet he refused medical attention until every civilian was accounted for. Cooper. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through the comm system, barely audible over the sound of incoming artillery. We've got Reaper Deathwalkers moving in from the north. ETA 3 minutes? Danny checked his rifle's ammunition counter and grimaced. 47 rounds left, and each of those mechanical nightmares typically required at least a full magazine to bring down. The math wasn't looking good, but then again, Marines had never been particularly good at mathematics anyway. That's when he noticed Elder Vexathi, the ancient Catherian leader, collapse from exhaustion near the shelter's central chamber. Her crystalline form had dimmed to almost nothing, the strain of maintaining the telepathic network for thousands of refugees, finally overwhelming her sentries. Constitution, without hesitation, Navy medic Lisa Patterson dropped her medical kit and rushed to the alien's side, her hands already reaching for the biostabilizers that might work on non-human physiology. Patterson was a small woman, barely 5'2" in her combat boots. But she had the kind of fierce determination that made hardened Marines step aside when she was working. "I'm staying," she announced when Danny tried to order her to the evacuation. "Shuttles. There are still wounded here, and I'm not leaving until every last one of them is safe." "That's a direct order, Patterson." Danny shouted over the increasing sound of enemy fire. "Get your ass on that shuttle." "With all due respect, Sergeant," Patterson replied while injecting some kind of human stimulant into Vexathi's crystalline bloodstream. "Go to hell." "I took an oath to preserve life, and that oath doesn't come with a species restriction clause." Elder Vexthia's ancient consciousness stirred as the human medicine worked its alien magic through her system. Through the telepathic link she shared with her people, she reached out to the gruff Marine who stood guard over them like some kind of armored guardian deity. "Why?" Her mental voice whispered into Danny's mind, filled with a wonder so profound it made his chest ache. "Your people are sacrificing everything for us. You're dying for complete strangers. We are nothing to you, yet you bleed for us as if we were your own children." Danny looked up through the smoke and debris at the space battle raging overhead, where human ships continued their suicidal holding action against impossible odds. Somewhere up there in that hellish light show, his younger brother Mike was fighting. Aboard the destroyer Defiant, probably already dead for all Danny knew. The kid had always been too brave for his own good, just like their old man who died fighting pirates in the outer colonies. But you know what? Some things were worth dying for, and protecting innocent people was at the top of that very short list. "Lady," Danny said, ejecting his spent magazine and slapping in a fresh one as the ground began to shake from approaching Reaper war machines. "Where I come from, we don't abandon people who need help. That's not who we are. That's not who we've ever been." The first Reaper Deathwalker appeared at the shelter's entrance like something out of humanity's worst. Nightmare's 12 feet of mechanical death designed for one purpose: killing everything that moved. Its plasma cannon began to charge with a whine that made Danny's teeth ache, and he knew that in about 3 seconds. Every person in this shelter was going to die. But here's the thing about Marines. They specialize in making the impossible look routine. "Patterson," Danny roared, diving toward the mechanical monster with nothing but a rifle and 20 years of righteous fury. "Get them out of here now." The plasma bolt meant to vaporize 50 refugees instead caught Marine Sergeant Danny Cooper, center mass, and as the world exploded in white-hot agony, his last thought was whether his sacrifice would buy enough time for the innocents to escape. Above them, space battle reached its climax as Captain Morrison made a decision that would echo through galactic history. Captain Jake Morrison stared at his tactical display with the kind of grim determination that comes from watching your friends die for something bigger than themselves. The holographic projection painted a picture that would have made a lesser man weep. Half his fleet was gone, reduced to twisted metal and debris clouds drifting through space, alongside the bodies of some of the finest people he'd ever known. The liberty, courage, and resolve were nothing but glowing wreckage now, their crews having paid the ultimate price to buy precious minutes for the evacuation. But here's the thing about desperate situations. They have a way of crystallizing what really matters in life. The evacuation ships carrying Catherian survivors were streaking toward the hyperspace jump point like refugees fleeing the apocalypse. Their cargo holds packed with alien families who had never asked for war, but had found themselves at the center of genocide anyway. They were only 7 minutes from safety, 7 minutes from disappearing into the cosmic highway that would carry them beyond the Reapers. Reach, 7 minutes might as well have been 7 years. Captain Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez reported, her voice steady despite the blood streaming down her face from a head wound that would have sent most people into shock. The woman was tough as nails had to be, growing up in the Detroit shipyards before joining the fleet. We're down to 4 ships: Thunderstrike, Defiant, Valiant, and New Hope. Enemy reinforcements just dropped out of hyperspace. We're looking at 18 Reaper vessels closing fast, including 3 of their super dreadnoughts. Jake nodded, slowly, his weathered hands gripping the command rail as the weight of command settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The math was brutal and unforgiving. 4 damaged human ships against 18 fresh enemy vessels, each one equipped with technology that made their weapons look like slingshots by comparison. Any reasonable military commander would have ordered a retreat 10 minutes ago. But reasonable men don't charge into hopeless battles to save strangers. All remaining ships? This is Thunderstrike, Jake announced over the fleet communications channel, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had already made peace with his mortality. Prepare for ramming speed. We're going to punch a hole through their lines so the civilians can escape. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of damaged engines struggling to keep them alive. Every officer present understood exactly what their captain was ordering: suicide. Pure, simple. Mathematically, certain suicide commander Ryan Walsh, Jake's oldest friend, and the man who had served as his conscience through 20 years of military service, stepped forward with protest written across his face. Sir, that's suicide. We're talking about ramming ships that outmass us by factors of 10. Even if we succeed, we'll all be dead, and there's no guarantee it'll work. So is letting innocent people die on our watch, Jake replied with the kind of cold finality that comes from absolute moral certainty. His blue eyes had taken on the hard glint of tempered steel, and everyone on the bridge knew that arguing further would be pointless. But you know what separates great leaders from good ones? Great leaders don't just give orders, they explain why those orders matter. Jake opened a channel to the entire remaining fleet, knowing that his words would likely be the last thing many of these brave souls ever heard. Listen up, everyone. Today we don't fight for territory or politics or glory. We don't fight for medals or commendations or the chance to go home heroes. Today we fight because someone has to stand between monsters and children. His voice carried across 4 ships, reaching into the hearts of 800 human beings who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a one-way mission. In the engine rooms, chief petty officers who had spent 30 years keeping ships running prepared to push their reactors past the red line one final time. On the gun decks, weapons specialists loaded their last rounds and said quiet prayers. To whatever gods might be listening, in medical bays, doctors and nurses prepared for casualties they knew they'd never live to treat. I won't lie to you, Jake continued, his voice softening just enough to remind them all that beneath the uniform beat the heart of a man who genuinely loved the people under his command. We're probably not coming back from this. But those evacuation Ships are carrying 2 million Catherian civilians, mothers, fathers, children who just want to live in peace. If we can buy them 7 more minutes, they'll make it to hyperspace. 7 minutes to save 2 million innocent lives on the planet. Below, something extraordinary was happening. The Catherians, with their telepathic connection that linked every member of their species in a vast psychic network, felt the shift in the battle's momentum like a physical weight settling over their collective consciousness. They sensed the humans preparing to die not in retreat or defeat, but in one final, defiant charge to save people they had never met. Elder Vexia, her ancient crystalline form, still weak from the evacuation but blazing with inner light, pressed her translucent hand against the observation portal of the refugee transport Prairie Wind. Through the psychic link, she felt the human captain's resolve, his willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers, and it broke something fundamental in her understanding of how the galaxy worked. "They're going to die for us," she whispered to the thousands of Catherian refugees packed into the cargo hold around her. "These strange, violent, beautiful creatures are going to throw away their lives so that we might live." Yonique Sara, her crystalline form now blazing with silver, hope light, pressed close to the elder. Why would they do such a thing? What could they possibly gain from our survival? Bex's answer would echo through Catherian culture for the next 1,000 years. Nothing. They gain absolutely nothing, except the knowledge that innocent people will see another sunrise. And then something happened that had never occurred in the history of either species. Elder Vexi began to sing not the mathematical harmonics that Catherians typically used for communication, but something deeper and more primal. It's a song of gratitude so profound it transcended language, species, or rational thought. One by one, every Catherian survivor joined their voice to hers. 2 million crystalline beings, scattered across dozens of evacuation ships, poured their gratitude and sorrow into space itself through the psychic link that bound them together. The song had no words, because words were inadequate. It was pure emotion given voice, loss, hope, and desperate thankfulness, flowing from an entire civilization to the strangers who were dying to save them. The humans heard it through their communication systems as their sensors picked up the telepathic resonance, and suddenly every bridge on every ship fell silent. Hardened warriors who had faced death a dozen times found tears streaming down their faces as they felt something they had never experienced before. An entire species saying goodbye and thank you. "Holy shit," whispered Ensign Bobby Chen from his position at the communications console, his young voice filled with wonder. "Captain, they're singing for us." Jake Morrison felt his own eyes burn as the alien lament washed over him like a benediction. In that moment, he knew, with absolute certainty, that they were doing the right thing, regardless of the cost. "All ships," he commanded, his voice thick with emotion but steady as granite, full power to engines. "Today we show the galaxy what humanity stands for." The 4 remaining human vessels surged forward like bullets fired from the barrel of righteousness. Itself, their crews singing along with an alien song they couldn't understand but felt in their bones. Behind them, the evacuation fleet continued its desperate race toward hyperspace, while ahead of them, 18 Reaper warships prepared to crush these insignificant insects. But as the distance closed and plasma cannons began to charge, Jake Morrison allowed himself one last thought about his daughter back on Earth, sleeping peacefully in her bed, completely unaware that her father was about to become either a hero or a footnote in galactic history. The collision countdown reached 0, and the universe held its breath. 6 months later, the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered in the crystal spires of Sanctuary Prime, and for the first time in galactic history, they were arguing about whether heroes could be born from a species most of them had never heard of before the Catherian incident. The Galactic Defense Coalition's emergency session had been called to address what the media was calling the human question, a diplomatic crisis that threatened to reshape the balance of power across 17 star systems. You know how sometimes a single moment changes everything? Like when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat, or when that unknown tank driver stood in front of the column in Tiananmen Square. The sacrifice of Captain Jake Morrison and his fleet had become one of those moments, a line drawn in the cosmic sand that forced every civilized species to choose what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. The assembly hall buzzed with the nervous energy of creatures who suddenly found their comfortable worldview challenged by the actions of primitive newcomers. Representatives from the Altarian Trade Federation whispered among themselves in their musical language, while the insectoid hive-mind collective communicated through pheromone bursts that smelled like anxiety and confusion. Even the ancient ethereal council, beings of pure energy who had existed since before most stars were born, seemed unsettled by the implications of what they had witnessed. Elder Vexthai stood before this assembly of galactic powers, her crystalline form blazing, with inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her emotions. She had spent 6 months preparing for this moment, practicing her speech in 17 different languages and telepathic frequencies, knowing that the fate of 2 species hung on her words. Honored representatives, she began, her telepathic voice echoing in every mind present with the clarity of crystal bells. We are here to discuss the immediate induction of humanity into full coalition membership. The reaction was immediate and explosive. You ever drop a firecracker into a hornet's nest? That's exactly what Vex's announcement did to the carefully controlled diplomatic atmosphere. Immediate full membership, screeched Ambassador Zektar. Of the Regaline Empire, his four-armed form quivering with indignation. These humans have barely achieved interstellar travel. They're violent, unpredictable primitives who solve every problem with weapons and explosions. The Centaurian delegate, a being that looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a philosophy professor, pulsed agreement. The human species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. Standard protocol requires at least 500 years of peaceful development before full membership consideration. But here's where Elder Vexti showed why she had survived 700 years of galactic politics and was still standing. We demand immediate full membership for humanity, she announced with the kind of authority that comes from absolute moral certainty, not as probationary members or junior partners, but as guardians and protectors of this coalition. The hall erupted in outrage so intense that the translation systems overloaded trying to process. 17 different species all shouting at once. The Altarians sang their displeasure in harmonics that shattered several crystal fixtures. The hive mind released pheromones so agitated that the environmental systems went into emergency purification mode. Even some of the energy beings flickered with what could only be described as cosmic irritation. But Vexi wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. You call them primitive, she said, her mental voice cutting through the chaos like a sword of pure conviction. You dismiss them as violent savages barely worthy of acknowledgement. But I have something to show you that will change your perspective forever. The massive holographic display at the center of the assembly hall flickered to life, showing the final moments of the human fleet at the Battle of Kithra Prime. Every representative fell silent as they watched. Captain Morrison's ships, burning, broken, and hopelessly outnumbered, form up for their final charge against the Reaper dreadnoughts. Listen, Vexi commanded, amplifying the audio so that every being in the hall could hear the human voices in those last moments. All ships, this is Captain Morrison. It's been an honor serving with you all. Tell our families we died for something that mattered. Copy that, Captain. See you on the other side. Thunderstrike, this is Defiant. We're taking heavy damage, but we're still with you. Let's show these bastards what humanity is made of. And then, impossibly, the humans began to sing. Even as their ships disintegrated around them, even as plasma fire turned their armor into molten metal, they sang songs from their homeworld ballads about courage and loss, hymns about hope and sacrifice. Folk songs that spoke of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The assembly hall remained dead silent as they watched the human ships slam into the Reaper formation like guided missiles of pure determination. As the explosions were visible from 3 star systems away, but more importantly, they bought enough time for 2 million Kitherian refugees to escape to hyperspace safety. This is what you call primitive Vexthi, said softly, her telepathic voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. When we screamed for help across the void, they came not with lawyers or diplomats or carefully worded treaties. They came with warriors ready to die for people they had never seen, for a species they had never encountered, for children who would never know their names. You could have heard a pin drop in that vast assembly hall. Representatives who had spent centuries debating the finer points of trade agreements and territorial disputes suddenly found themselves confronted with something they had no framework to understand: pure, selfless heroism. "This is what the galaxy needs," Vexi continued, her form blazing brighter with each word. "Not another civilization seeking profit or power or political advantage. Not another species looking to expand their territory or exploit weaker neighbors. We need protectors who will stand against the darkness simply because it's the right thing to do." Meanwhile, back on Earth, something beautiful was happening in a small cemetery in Colorado. Martha Morrison, a 60-year-old retired school teacher with silver hair and kind eyes, knelt beside her son's grave and placed fresh flowers on the simple military headstone. The inscription read, "Captain Jacob Morrison, United Earth Fleet, beloved son and hero." Beside her stood Elder Vexi and a delegation of Catherian survivors, their crystal bodies harmonizing a song of eternal gratitude that needed no translation. The alien melody seemed to make the very air shimmer with emotion, and Martha felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she touched her son's name carved in stone. "He was a good boy," she said simply, her voice thick with the kind of pride that comes mixed with unbearable loss. "Always standing up for bullies at school, always bringing home stray animals, always trying to fix things that were broken. Even as a little child, he couldn't stand to see anyone suffer. He saved an entire species," Vexithai replied gently, her telepathic voice carrying warmth that transcended the barriers between different forms of life. "His name will be remembered as long as stars burn in the galaxy. They all will be every human who answered our call, every soul who chose to fight for strangers." Above them, in the park that bordered the cemetery, something magical was taking place. Human and Catherian children played together on the swings and slides, their laughter carrying on the wind like a promise that some sacrifices echo through eternity. The alien children's crystalline forms caught the sunlight and threw rainbows across the playground, while human kids marveled at their new friends who could change colors with their emotions. "Look, Mommy," called 7-year-old Emma Morrison Jake's daughter, who would grow up never really knowing her father, but always knowing what he had died for. "Nyx can make her hands glow like fireflies." Young Nyxara, the Catherian child who had been in Shelter Complex Alpha 7 when Marine Sergeant Danny Cooper had died protecting her, giggled in the universal language of childhood joy. The crystalline form pulsed with happy yellow light. As she showed Emma how to make shadow puppets that sparkled and danced, Martha Morrison watched her granddaughter play with the alien child her son had died to save. And for the first time since receiving that awful notification 6 months ago, she felt something other than grief. She felt hope. Back on Sanctuary Prime, the vote was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, species was granted immediate full membership in the coalition, based not on their technology or military might or economic potential, but on a single act of selfless courage that had reminded the galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized. As the representatives dispersed to carry news of humanity's elevation to their home worlds, Elder Vexti stood alone in the Great Hall and sent one final telepathic message toward Earth. "Thank you, Captain Morrison. Thank you for showing us that heroes are not born from advanced technology or ancient wisdom, but from the simple choice to stand between evil and innocence, regardless of the cost." The galaxy had found its guardians, and they looked exactly like the species. Everyone had underestimated ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply because someone needed help. The end.